Deep beneath California, scientists may have discovered something enormous and completely unexpected. A massive crack hidden deep inside the Earth's crust. A fracture that could stretch for hundreds of kilometers beneath parts of the western United States. And the strange part is that nobody saw it coming. California is one of the most heavily studied seismic regions on the entire planet. Thousands of instruments constantly monitor the ground. Satellites track movements smaller than the width of a fingernail, and scientists have spent decades mapping the famous faults that cut through the state. Yet, despite all this technology, something huge may have been hiding underground the entire time. Recent seismic studies suggest that deep beneath California, there may be a large fracture in the Earth's lithosphere, the rigid outer shell of our planet. A massive crack under California that scientists are only now beginning to understand. So what exactly did researchers find? How could something this big remain hidden for so long? And could it change what we know about earthquakes in North America? At first glance, California shouldn't have many geological secrets left. It sits along one of the most famous tectonic boundaries in the world. The Pacific Plate and the North American Plate grind past each other here every single day. That slow movement is responsible for thousands of earthquakes every year. Most of them are tiny, but sometimes the pressure builds up for decades, until the rocks suddenly slip. When that happens, enormous energy is released in seconds. That's what we feel as an earthquake. Scientists have spent more than a century studying this process across California. Major faults like the San Andreas Fault are mapped in incredible detail. Researchers know where stress is building and where earthquakes are likely to happen. But here's the surprising part. The Earth's crust isn't just one clean crack. It's more like shattered glass, a tangled network of faults, fractures, and ancient scars left behind by millions of years of tectonic movement. Some of those fractures reach deep underground, far below where geologists can directly observe them. And sometimes, they stay hidden. That's exactly what may have happened with this newly identified crack beneath California. Scientists didn't find it by drilling or digging. Instead, they used earthquakes themselves to reveal what's happening underground. Every time a small earthquake occurs, it sends waves traveling through the Earth. These waves move differently depending on the type of rock they pass through. Some layers slow them down, others bend or scatter them. By studying how thousands of these waves move through the crust, scientists can build something like a CT scan of the planet. And when researchers analyzed years of seismic data across California, something unusual appeared deep beneath the surface. Patterns in the seismic waves suggested the presence of a long fracture structure buried deep in the lithosphere. In simple terms, it looked like a massive crack running through the deeper layers of the Earth's crust, potentially stretching for hundreds of kilometers beneath California. Even more surprising, the structure didn't match the location of any major known surface fault. That means it may exist far below the cracks geologists can see from above. In other words, part of the planet's outer shell may actually be tearing deep underground. And this is where things get interesting. Scientists believe this deep fracture could help explain some strange earthquake behavior across the region. Certain earthquakes in California don't always follow the patterns researchers expect. Some happen deeper than typical faults. Others appear in clusters that don't align with known fault lines. A hidden crack in the lithosphere could act like a pathway that guides stress through the crust, almost like a hidden seam inside the planet. But researchers are still trying to understand exactly how this structure behaves. It may not produce large earthquakes directly. Instead, it might influence how energy moves through the surrounding rock. And discoveries like this are a reminder that even well-studied places can still surprise scientists. California isn't the only region in North America where hidden cracks in the Earth have revealed unexpected seismic risks. One famous example lies thousands of kilometers away in the central United States. In the early 1800s, a series of powerful earthquakes struck near the Mississippi River in an area now known as the New Madrid seismic zone. These earthquakes were so strong that they reportedly caused parts of the Mississippi River to temporarily flow backward. Forests collapsed, the ground cracked open, and church bells rang hundreds of kilometers away. What made these earthquakes so mysterious is that they happened far from any major tectonic plate boundary. For years, scientists struggled to explain them. Eventually, researchers discovered that the region sits on top of an ancient failed rift, a massive crack in the Earth's crust that began forming hundreds of millions of years ago when North America almost split apart. The rift never fully opened, but the weakness in the crust remained. And today, that ancient fracture can still generate earthquakes. Another dramatic example lies along the Pacific Northwest. For centuries, scientists didn't realize that the Cascadia subduction zone was capable of producing gigantic earthquakes. Then researchers began studying coastal sediments, drowned forests, and tsunami records in Japan. The evidence revealed that in the year 1700, a massive magnitude 9 earthquake struck the region. It generated a tsunami that traveled across the entire Pacific Ocean. And for hundreds of years, nobody in North America even realized it had happened. Discoveries like these have changed how scientists think about earthquakes. Because the Earth's crust isn't simple. It's full of hidden fractures, buried faults, and ancient tectonic scars that can remain invisible for centuries, until new technology finally reveals them. The possible massive crack beneath California may be another example of this hidden complexity. It doesn't necessarily mean a huge earthquake is coming, but it does show that the deep structure of the planet beneath California may be far more complicated than scientists once believed. Every new seismic study helps researchers build better models of how stress moves through the crust. Those models are crucial for improving earthquake hazard maps and early warning systems. In a region where tens of millions of people live near active faults, even small improvements in understanding the Earth can make a big difference. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this discovery is what it tells us about our planet. Even in places scientists have studied for generations, even with satellites, seismic networks, and powerful computers, the Earth can still hide enormous structures deep underground. And the deeper researchers look beneath California, the more they realize something surprising. The ground beneath one of America's largest and most populated states may be far more fractured and far less predictable than anyone once believed.
Something is about to reshape the entire future of the West Coast. The coastline, the infrastructure, the whole map. Scientists fear there is not one but two big earthquakes coming, one caused by another. This wasn't even on the radar for most people, but new research is changing everything. For decades, everyone treated the San Andreas Fault and the Cascadia subduction zone like two separate monsters that just happened to live in the same neighborhood. They were powerful, yes, but independent. But now, scientists believe these two giant faults are mechanically linked, and one can literally pull the other into rupturing shortly afterward. Cascadia moves, San Andreas moves. San Andreas tears, Cascadia tears. And the potential consequences of that are honestly haunting. Scientists found evidence that it happened at least 10 times in the last 3,100 years. Earthquake, pause, earthquake. It comes from marine sediment cores, which are like time capsules pulled up from the ocean floor. Researchers analyzed layer after layer of seabed sediment and found doublets, paired debris layers created by two massive quakes happening so close together that the ocean barely had time to settle between them. That discovery takes us to the Mendocino Triple Junction, the geological troublemaker of the West Coast. It's the place where three tectonic plates crash and grind into each other like badly aligned gears. It's also the zone where the San Andreas meets Cascadia, which makes it the perfect place for these double quakes to form. The stress changes caused by a rupture in one fault travel straight through this junction and destabilize the other. It's benign when it happens to a bookshelf. When you move one book, three others shift. But when you think about it like a coastline with millions of people, entire cities, major infrastructure, it instantly feels terrifying. To many people who live on the West Coast, the San Andreas kind of feels like a California's problem, and Cascadia like an Oregon and Washington's problem. But when you understand that these two faults can essentially fire at each other, it stops being a local issue and becomes a continental one. A Cascadia megaquake alone can hit magnitude 9.0 plus, rip open 600 to 700 miles of seafloor, and send a tsunami roaring toward the Pacific coast. And it could just be the first quake, and then, maybe minutes later, the San Andreas snaps in Northern California. The shaking could ripple down the state like a zipper tearing open a jacket, and if it goes the other direction, it could be just as bad. If the San Andreas ruptures first, the intense stress redistribution can destabilize the Cascadia subduction zone. You could get the California quake first with buildings rocking, highways breaking, and power stations failing. And then, soon after, the ocean pulls back in Oregon or Washington. And the 20-minute countdown to a tsunami begins, a follow-up disaster. It's the kind of chain reaction you don't want even in a video game, let alone real life. This discovery also tells us something eerie about the earthquake in 1700, the one that sent a tsunami across the Pacific so huge that it struck Japan with no warning. Japanese fishermen called that wave the orphan tsunami because it arrived without any felt shaking. Only centuries later, scientists figured out that it came from the Pacific Northwest. But until recently, no one knew that the San Andreas might have felt that event too, and it possibly slipped or destabilized because of it. So, the whole West Coast may have moved together. And we've come to the scariest part. All this isn't about if, it's strictly about when. The faults have a rhythm, a pace, and a geological heartbeat. We've seen how they behave across thousands of years. We know what they did, and now we know they sometimes do it in sequence. The real fear isn't the first quake. California already expects a big one. The real fear is the second quake, the one that comes before you've checked on your family, before emergency responders regroup, before the power comes back, and before the dust settles. Even if you don't live on the West Coast, this matters for you too. The ports in California, Oregon, and Washington handle a massive chunk of America's imports. Knock them offline, and it's not just the coastline that feels it. The ripple hits the entire country, and potentially the world. Grocery prices spike, supply chains freeze, gas availability dips, shipping timelines go nuts. The world is much more connected than any of us thought, and a geological double punch on the Pacific coast wouldn't stay a local disaster. It would spread, thread by thread, into everyone's life. So, those in power must prepare not for one giant rupture, but for two. Emergency plans, evacuation routes, response times, and power grid designs, all of it needs updating. Because nature has now shown us what even a single major rupture can do to a modern economy. It happened in Japan in 1995, on January 17th at 5:46 in the morning. The quake hit right by the northern tip of Awaji Island, only 12 miles from Kobe, a huge, busy city with about 1.4 million people back then, and another 2.6 million in Osaka nearby. The rupture ripped along the Nojima Fault for about 25 miles. That doesn't sound like much until you realize entire buildings can't survive that kind of sideways shove. More than 5,000 people lost their lives. 43,000 were injured. Nearly 400,000 buildings were irreparably damaged. This disaster hit one of Japan's largest industrial zones. And when you mess with a place like that, the shock doesn't stop at the shoreline. The damage was $200 billion US in losses, from smashed buildings and infrastructure and many businesses shutting down. Kobe's port just collapsed. Only 30% of the Osaka-Kobe railway lines worked. Part of National Route 28 literally vanished into the ground. Schools, hospitals, and municipal buildings, 85% of them took damage or were unusable. Fires broke out across Kobe, almost 300 separate incidents, burning the equivalent of 70 US city blocks and taking another 600 to 700 lives. Almost 100,000 people permanently left the region, 2.5% of the whole population gone in less than a year. And here's a detail that stuck with me. So many bridges failed that engineers suddenly had to confront how poorly older designs handled lateral shaking. Houses with heavy tiled roofs, built to fight typhoons, crumbled because all that weight sat too high. But the newer homes made after the 1981 building code revision stood. And that's when Japan realized that modern seismic standards were crucial to follow. Japan threw $58 billion US into restoring the region. Power came back in days. Roads and rail returned in 5 to 8 months. The main expressway took 21 months. The port was fully rebuilt in just over 2 years. And by then, all debris was cleared. Within 15 months, manufacturing jumped back to 98% of its old level. Stores reopened. By 1999, Kobe's economy reached roughly 75 to 90% of pre-quake levels. Japan overhauled its disaster management system entirely. They set up the Central Disaster Management Council and rewrote building codes. They upgraded everything from emergency drills to fire-resistant city layouts, and they launched the Earthquake Early Warning System that now gives Japan those precious few seconds before shaking hits. The same system that saved countless lives since 2007. But despite all this improvement, the Kansai region still sits on dangerous ground. The Roku Awajishima fault system, the same one that snapped in 1995, still runs under them. The 2018 Northern Osaka quake and the 2024 Noto Peninsula quake reminded everyone that this threat didn't disappear. It just waits its turn. A future large event on that system could hit even harder simply because the region has grown more complex, more interconnected, and more economically loaded. So Kobe wasn't even a triggered double fault rupture, but it still broke a major industrial hub, reshaped a national economy, and permanently changed global shipping routes. That's why when scientists started talking about 2 joint faults firing off back-to-back in Cascadia and San Andreas, you don't even have to imagine the consequences. We already got a preview in 1995.
Oh boy, there's something huge lurking under the ocean, and no one really knows what it is. For weeks, weird waves have been showing up out of nowhere, and people are starting to whisper about giant spherical objects. They're sitting deep down below on the ocean floor. No one's ever seen anything like this before. Now, let's say you're living by the sea. One day, you start spotting unusual waves rolling in for no reason at all. The weather isn't stormy, there's no wind, just strange rhythmic swells of water. Naturally, you get curious and a little nervous. Then the word gets out. There are several massive spheres on the seafloor, each weighing about 400 tons. That's not something you see every day. Speculations begin running wild. Are those massive eggs of a new deep-sea species? Is it some kind of equipment? Is someone conducting a top-secret science experiment? Or has another civilization visited us and installed some cosmic technology? After weeks of guessing, you find out the truth. It comes from the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. Those giant spheres are part of a revolutionary renewable energy storage system, and those odd surface waves are just a side effect of its operation. So it's not a threat after all. It's a step toward a better future. Giant concrete spheres, sitting almost 2,000 feet underwater, are part of something called the Salton Sea project. That's short for Stored Energy in the Sea. Basically, it's a smart way to store renewable energy, where the ocean does most of the work. Here's how it works. The spheres are hollow. When they're charged, they're empty inside. Then, when a valve is opened, seawater rushes in, and that flow spins turbines that generate energy. So these things are like massive underwater batteries. And probably the best thing is that they don't take up any land space and don't mess with the local ecosystem, a minimal impact on marine life. Amazingly, these 400-ton spheres aren't the first energy spheres we've seen in renewable energy either. There's already a wind energy sphere that promises energy from all directions, and some people are sure that it might even beat solar panels. Alright, picture a wind turbine, but not the usual tall three-bladed kind. The O-wind turbine is spherical. It looks like a big ball. It doesn't care which way the wind blows, it just grabs it. The huge ball has a network of vents and channels that funnel the wind straight to the blades inside. So, no matter which way a gust comes from, the turbine can still spin and generate electricity. Because it can capture wind from all sides, it's way more efficient than traditional turbines in places where the wind is kinda erratic or keeps changing direction. In the right conditions, this kind of turbine might be more efficient than solar panels, which are the most effective when the sun is shining. At the same time, the O-wind turbine can generate electricity anytime there's no wind, no matter the time of day. That makes it a much more reliable source of renewable energy, especially in places where the weather loves to change its mind. Another big plus is the size. Solar panels need a lot of space to produce significant energy, and it can be tricky in cities. The O-wind turbine is compact and can fit on roofs, balconies, or other spots where space is tight. Now, not every O-wind turbine produces the same amount of power. It really depends on where you put it. Wind speed, its direction, and consistency all play a role in how much energy it generates. That's why it's so important to find the right place for the turbine. The company behind the technology, O Innovations, even provides special tools to analyze your location and figure out the best spot for installation. Getting back to our giant otherworldly spheres, each of them is supposed to last 50 to 60 years, and the turbines and generators inside are swapped out roughly every 20 years. Altogether, these spheres could store about 817,000 gigawatts. That's enough energy to power over 200,000 homes. These underwater giants are quietly sitting there, holding massive amounts of clean energy, ready to release it when we need it. Right now, the project off the coast of California is still just a plan, but it's already drawing attention. There's an idea to build even larger spheres, up to almost 100 feet wide. That's like a small building underwater. And it doesn't have to stop in the US. We could easily replicate the system in other deep coastal areas, like Norway, Portugal, Japan, and others. Basically, anywhere you've got deep water, these spheres could be storing clean energy. Now, besides the amazing underwater spheres, the future of renewable energy might include wind trees, kinetic tiles, jellyfish, static charges, and tons of more creative things. For example, wind trees are basically mini wind turbines that look like actual trees. They're made up of a metal tree structure, and the leaves are tiny turbines. Some of them even have up to 4 batteries to store the energy they produce. Under the right conditions, one of those could generate enough power for a 4-person household. That's around 18,000 kilowatts a year. The idea is pretty smart. These wind trees could bring renewable energy into private homes or urban areas where there isn't room for a big wind farm. Other designs even combine small solar panels with the turbines, so they can pull in energy from both the sun and the wind. Your dancing or walking could make electricity. And that's exactly what kinetic tiles do. They capture energy from movement and turn it into power. Each tile has a little generator inside. When someone dances, walks, or jumps on it, the tile produces energy, which is then stored in a supercapacitor. Numerous tiles can be linked together to power things like lights or small devices. And it's not just for dance floors, no. In the UK in 2022, a short stretch of kinetic pavement was installed to power nearby phone chargers. People who were walking by could literally see their steps turn into energy. Researchers think kinetic tiles could be used in schools and offices to power Wi-Fi, lights, or other electronics. Plus, some of these tiles are made from recycled materials, like plastic. This makes them even more eco-friendly. Now, I'll bet you've walked across a carpet in socks and zapped yourself on a doorknob at least once in your life. Well, that's static electricity at work. The amount of charge you generate depends on what you're wearing and even your size, so it's not exactly predictable. On average, a person can build up about 250 mini-joules of energy before discharging it. Honestly, that's not a lot, but you can still perform a little trick. Rub a balloon on your hair to charge it up, and then press the base of a light bulb to the balloon. The bulb will light up. Is it a realistic way to power your house? Probably not. But maybe we'll work out a way to turn this tiny amount of energy into something serious in the future. After all, even jellyfish can help us produce clean energy. Bioluminescent jellyfish have a fluorescent protein that can be turned into a kind of solar cell that's more sustainable than regular photovoltaic cells. A team at Chalmers University in Sweden put a tiny droplet of the jellyfish protein on aluminum electrodes and hit it with UV light. The protein released electrons, creating electricity. In other words, they made a biological fuel cell that can generate power without needing any outside source. It's still in the early days, but it's a glimpse at how nature itself could help us power our devices someday. So yeah, maybe the future of clean energy isn't something you see. It's something quietly existing at the bottom of the ocean, storing power and keeping our planet greener, and we don't even notice.
You are looking at a remarkable idea, for this is the story of the miracle sea.
This massive lake in California is worth $540 billion, as it holds enough lithium to power over 30 trillion iPhones. That's way more than experts predicted, making it one of the biggest lithium reserves ever. This finding could revolutionize the US economy, but a major challenge is still standing in the way. If it's not solved, all that money will stay buried forever. First things first, lithium. This metal is so valuable that people call it white gold, and it's unbelievably light. In fact, it's the lightest solid on Earth at room temperature. It was discovered by a Swedish chemist in 1817, and honestly, since then, we didn't really care much about lithium. This poor metal was ignored for centuries because it didn't seem to have any practical use in everyday life. I mean, sure, it's light, it's white, it's shiny. But what could we actually do with it? At some point, though, another trait of this metal started to stand out: its reactivity. Basically, it bonds really easily with other elements. But that also means something else. It can catch fire in seconds. For example, if you expose it to air, it goes through a wild oxidization reaction, and before you know it, boom! Flames everywhere. This might sound like danger to you, but to scientists, it screamed Eureka! Because being super light and super reactive actually makes it the perfect material for batteries. And you get why that's a big deal nowadays, right? Batteries power almost everything around us, like smartphones, cars, and even small airplanes. Since everyone suddenly wants lithium, demand has skyrocketed, and it's not slowing down anytime soon. Back in 2021, for example, the world produced about 540,000 tons of it. But by 2030, predictions say demand could soar past 3 million tons. And here's the problem: lithium is a finite resource. There are only about 100 lithium mines in the world, mostly in Australia, Chile, and China. Sure, supply is expected to grow, but demand is climbing much faster. That means we could be facing a shortage soon. Lithium mines can keep up with today's demand, but they won't be able to do that for many more years. So that's why finding new lithium reserves today is basically like winning the lottery. In this case, the United States is one of the lucky winners. First, there's the Thacker Pass mine. This spot in Nevada might hold the largest untapped lithium reserves on the planet. To put it in perspective, some estimates say it could supply up to 1/4 of the world's lithium demand. We're talking as much as 40 million tons of this precious metal, and that might be worth over $500 billion. Right there, they'll be extracting lithium from clay. This might be challenging, since this process has never been done on such a huge scale before, but it's doable. A couple of years ago, the United States found another big win in the lithium game: the Salton Sea. This is a huge, shallow lake located in Southern California's Imperial County. At first, they announced that this spot could hold over 3.4 million tons of lithium underground. That would be enough to make more than 375 million batteries for electric vehicles. That was already huge. But then, more recently, specialists realized they had made a mistake. Actually, a good mistake. The amount of lithium there is likely much, much higher. It could hold 18 million tons of it. Now, the Salton Sea is being considered the 5th largest lithium deposit in the world. This could be a real game changer. The United States is betting big on this mineral, hoping it'll help keep the country's economy strong for decades to come. So, finding this second big source of lithium was a huge relief. It means America is one step closer to relying less on other countries. And, by the way, most of its lithium right now comes from Chile.
We refer to as the Saudi Arabia of lithium.
Of course, California is thrilled about this, seeing it as a potential economic windfall. The region is already being called the Saudi Arabia of lithium, or Lithium Valley, because of its potential to dominate the battery supply chain. And if it works out, it'll be a huge benefit for the state. Apparently, authorities plan to use 80% of the money from lithium extraction for local development and infrastructure. The idea is to upgrade roads, schools, and other public services. That could create a lot of new jobs for Imperial County, which is considered one of California's poorest regions. Big question: if the lithium is hiding under the lake, can they even get it out? Well, yes, at least in theory. There are two main ways companies usually extract lithium. The first is the old-school method, open pit mining, where the rock is dug up, crushed, and processed. That's what they do at Thacker Pass, for example. They use massive hydraulic shovels to dig the metal out of the clay. Then there are evaporation ponds. Here, they pump lithium-rich brine to the surface and let the water evaporate, leaving the metal behind. The problem with both methods is that they use tons of water and can cause a lot of contamination and waste. At the Salton Sea in California, things work a little differently. Instead of giant pits or evaporation ponds, companies are using the area's natural geothermal power to pull it out in a cleaner way. This method is called direct lithium extraction. And here's how it works. Near the lake, there are already 11 geothermal power plants that pump up super hot mineral-rich brine from underground. Normally, that brine is just used to make steam, which spins turbines to generate electricity. But now, companies are figuring out how to pull the lithium out of that same brine before sending it back underground. Since they're already pumping the brine for energy, collecting the lithium doesn't need any extra digging or big ponds. So it avoids most of the water waste and pollution you get with old methods. It's like getting clean energy and battery materials at the same time, but with way less impact on the environment. This method sounds brilliant and totally doable, but it also comes with challenges that won't be easy to overcome. Sure, people call it environmentally friendly, but that's only when you compare it to other ways of getting lithium. This method still raises concerns about water use. People in California are already dealing with shortages, and large-scale lithium extraction could put even more pressure on the region's limited water supply. The Salton Sea itself is shrinking fast. Water levels have dropped by more than 9 feet over the past 25 years. That creates a huge problem. Less water means more exposed lakebed. And the sediments there can contain harmful materials. As the lake shrinks, that exposed lakebed dries out and turns to dust. And that dust doesn't just sit there. The wind picks it up and blows it into the air. Now, the Salton Sea's shrinking shoreline is releasing toxic dust into the air. And that dust has been linked to increasing rates of respiratory problems among local residents. Authorities are already taking steps to reverse the situation by adding water to the dry parts of the Salton Sea. They're filling shallow ponds near the lake to make new wetlands. Their goal is to create a safe habitat for fish and birds, and to help keep that toxic dust under control. Some people worry that digging up all this white gold could make the Salton Sea shrink even faster and undo years of restoration work. For now, studies show geothermal plants only use about 4% of the region's water supply. But researchers still don't know if expanding these operations could end up making the water problem worse. So, what happens next? It's too soon to say, but one thing's for sure, we will need a lot more research to understand what this all means, not just for the Salton Sea, but for the future of the US economy.